11-02, non-commercial collection of reptiles, amphibians for 2011-2012, wildlife diversity. Laura Richards, action.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Again, Laura Richards, Chief of Wildlife Diversity. Commission Regulation 11-02 is to establish the 2011 and 12 season and limits for non-commercial or hobby collecting of live, unprotected reptiles and amphibians. We have proposed no change in the species, bag limits, or possession limits from the 2009-10 regulation. The only proposed change to this new regulation was house cleaning. We had a few scientific names that had changed from 2 years ago, so that's the only change that is in the regulation from 2 years ago. If you look at agenda item number 13, it states that the field collection season is closed for species that are not listed below. We have a number of lizards, snakes, amphibians, and then below that are non-native amphibians and reptiles. We have the bag limit listed and also the possession limit. On non-native amphibians and reptiles, there is no limit. So
how many changes were there on here? You said there were several changes.
Well, we only corrected some scientific names. Okay. There was no change in the species list themselves.
Okay, so every species was on there previously is on there.
That's correct.
Excellent. Questions from the Commission? We have a question from Mr. Cavan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Laura, you need to educate me a little bit. So who does this apply to, and is there a permit or anything involved?
There's no permit involved. It's hobby collection, and it's for, you know, kids or anybody that wants to collect reptiles, amphibians in the field, bring them back to their homes, or, you know, sometimes they're brought into schools, reptiles and so forth. So that's the purpose of the regulation, to allow that.
I guess the question is then, how do people know that this regulation is in place? I think, fortunately, my son is out of that range now, but I think he was probably illegal a few times when he was a kid.
Well, the bag limits and the possession limits are pretty liberal, and Rob, I don't know if you would want to, oh, he didn't go, you know, on enforcement issues, I don't know if it's become an issue.
I guess my question is, do we publish this anywhere? Do we put out a brochure? Do we do any of that? Or is this just something that's on the book?
It's on our website. It's in the books. We don't publish it, I don't believe. We could certainly have it on our website and available to the public.
Mr. Bonamici, do we have, has there been any violations of this in recent history?
No, we find very few violations of this, especially with the juveniles. If they are in violation, you know, it's usually having a chat with them. But as far as adults, we haven't run into much in the way of violations. The violations are more associated with our commercial collectors and pit traps and prohibited methods there.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions from the Commission? Seeing none, let's move on to public comments. Is there any public comment on this issue? Mr. Dixon. I think the county advisory boards, I saw everybody was in favor of it, but I think there was one or two that didn't make a comment.
Paul Dixon, Clark County Advisory Board. I had one question for, and maybe Rob can come in and answers. The bag limit, the bag limit says X number per year, and the possession limit is the exact same amount. How do you monitor that a kid goes out one weekend and collects 5, and the next weekend goes out and does the thing if the bag limit is per year? And is that even enforceable to have a per year bag limit when it's the same as possession? That's the question I had. Thank you.
Okay.
For the record, Rob Bonamici, Chief Game Warden. In all honesty, we don't put a lot of effort. We don't have the personnel to put a lot of effort into monitoring this. Like, again, it's kids. These are, you know, these rules are out there in case we run across something egregious, and then we'll deal with that. And the way we usually end up investigating those type of egregious cases is through a tip. We very rarely run into these folks in the field.
Excellent. Thank you. Further public comment on this issue? Seeing none, we'll bring it back. Ooh, there's one, sorry.
Of course. Jim Janay, Lyon County Game Board. We approved it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Further public comment? All right, seeing none, we'll close public hearing, bring it back to the commission.
I just read an article in Idaho that they just did a regulation because there's a big push on the for those guys up there selling rattlesnake skins. There's a big market for them. So Idaho is watching it pretty carefully because they found a big market going on with rattlesnake skins.
Okay. Comment?
Yeah, for the record, Rob Bonamici again, Chief Game Warden. That falls under a commercial collection, and in those cases, we do put more of an enforcement effort into that as personnel availability exists. But we do emphasize the commercial end of it a lot more than we'll emphasize the non-commercial.
The one or two here and
Yeah.
there. Got it. Makes sense to me. Anything further? Motions? I believe this is an action item.
You ready already?
I'm ready.
Move to approve.
Second.
Regulation 11-02.
Second was by who? Vogler. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Motion is made by Mr. Howell, seconded by Mr. Vogler to approve Commission Regulation 11-02, non-commercial collection of reptiles and amphibians as presented. Does everybody understand the motion? All in favor of the motion signify by stating aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes unanimously.